All right, let's go ahead and get started. For those of you who just are joining us, welcome again to the Teaching English in Latin America webinar. I really appreciate you all being here with me this afternoon. The webinar will take about an hour or so, maybe a little bit less, just depending on how many questions and things everyone has. So yeah, just a little bit about me. My name is Christy. I work in the Student Affairs Department. I've been with International TEFL Academy since 2011. So I've been doing this for quite a while and I absolutely love it. And you are all in luck because Latin America is actually my favorite part of the world. I did not teach there, but I've done extensive traveling through the region. So feel free to let me know whatever questions you have. I actually did my English teaching experience in Nepal and also Chicago. So had a little bit of experience at home and overseas teaching. So yeah, if you guys actually all just want to chat to me real quickly, where in Latin America are you looking to go? I'd love to see where everybody is thinking, what countries you're particularly interested in. That would be awesome. Go ahead and just shoot them in the chat box real quick. Oh, cool. We've got Mexico City. We've got Argentina. What else? Where else are you guys looking to go? Oh, Panama, another Argentina. Very exciting. Chile, Peru. Awesome. Bolivia. Cool. Costa Rica. So we've got some really awesome options. It looks like you guys are interested in a lot of different places. So that's really great. So just a couple of things before we do get started as well. If you do have questions, feel free to type them into the chat box. I may not get to them until the end of the webinar. So I'm happy to stick around though for about 10 to 15 minutes after we're all finished, just to answer any questions that you guys do have. So feel free, just put them in there, but I promise that I will get to them if I don't actually during the webinar. Also, you are all muted, so that's so everybody can hear well, so there's no feedback or issues. So that's why it's best to just go ahead and type your questions into the chat box if you do have them. Also, this is being recorded, so this will be available, and along with all of our other webinars on the previously recorded webinars document as well. So don't worry if you missed something, you will have access to it later. Okay, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, so this is the basic agenda for what we're going to go over today. So we're going to just do a quick, brief overview of Latin America. We're going to chat visas real quick, and then actually go into each country with the biggest demand, okay? So obviously there are other countries in Latin America, but these are really the countries that we see a higher need for English teachers. So we're going to go into each country and just go into the specifics a little bit about the market, you know, about how you find a job there, visas, all of that good stuff, okay? So you will leave the webinar hopefully having a better idea of what you'll need to do depending on which country you're interested in. Okay, so overview, the job demand. Over the past few years, there really has been a huge increase in demand of English instruction due to tourism. You know, it's really been booming lately in Latin America. There's been huge economy growth in certain countries and rising living standards. So the need to learn English for a lot of these countries has just been really, really growing over the years. So the requirements, in many of the places, a college degree is preferred, but not necessarily required. So if you are somebody who does not have a bachelor's degree, this is actually a really awesome part of the world to consider because not all countries or schools or visa requirements always require a college degree. There are a few exceptions. However, generally speaking, this is a great area to take a look at. Age as well. This is also a part of the world that generally accepts teachers who might be a little bit more mature and over the age of 40. So not just looking for, you know, 22 to 30-year-olds. I mean, they really respect and are looking for any teachers who have a positive attitude and a willingness and excitement to be a teacher. So this is a little bit different than, say, Asia, for example. So hiring process, something about Latin America, I'm sure many of you have seen or heard already, are that the interviews typically are face-to-face in the country. So a lot of these schools and countries will actually require you to go to the country and do your interviews in person. In the major cities. Now, there absolutely are exceptions. There are countries that are a little bit more likely to hire you in advance from home before you actually go. But a lot of times, really, it will require you to actually go to the country and do your interviews in person. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The students also are mostly adults at private language schools. Okay, so generally speaking, the majority of the demand is for adult language instruction. However, that doesn't mean that there are zero opportunities to teach children, because that's absolutely not true. It's just in the majority of the countries you will find most of the schools and most of the demand looking for you to actually be teaching adults. Okay. Wages. All right, you're not gonna, get rich going to Latin America, okay? And if you have student loans and things that you need to pay off, probably really not the best part of the world to be considering. The wages really are going to be break even. With that being said, though, I mean, you're going to be living comfortably, so you'll be making enough money to pay for your basic living expenses, so your rent, your transportation, food, maybe some minor travel, things like that. But you're really not going to be saving hundreds of dollars every month living here. So you're really doing it for the experience and because maybe you want to learn Spanish or, just love Latin American food or whatever it might be. But the good thing too about Latin America is there typically are low startup costs. And exchange rates typically work in, depending on your home country, in our favor. However, so if you are looking to maybe earn a little bit extra cash, always keep in mind that you can tutor ESL students privately in person. So if you're willing to work a little bit more outside hours from your actual school that you're working for, you can absolutely find students to tutor privately on the side or online teaching. Online teaching has just really boomed in the past few years. I've just seen a huge influx and just lots of companies and schools opening up. And honestly, this is an awesome way to supplement your income. Working online, also working in a school, usually teaching online, sometimes it's a little bit more flexible with your hours. And we also see a lot of people actually just traveling through Latin America, living on their tourist visa and moving every 3 months or depending on the country, how long they can stay as a tourist, and just teaching online too. So that is another option. If you are interested in that, we do have an online teaching webinar, an entire section in our job search guidance manual. So be sure to check that out if that is interesting to you. Okay, so flights as well. So one really important thing to mention to you all is that you really do want to think about having a return flight or onward travel within the allotted time of your tourist visa for Latin America or kind of wherever you're going to be traveling if you decide not to go to Latin America. So really, this is because many times either the customs officials or the airlines will want to know that you're not planning and just going and staying in the country. Okay, so sometimes even if you have like a bus ticket out of the country within the allotted time for your tourist visa is a good idea, just to prove to them that you're not going to be staying, even though you are, and either you'll be getting a work visa or working around that depending on the country. It's just good to prove that you're going to be moving on. So in the past, when I have flown, I have bought actually a one-way ticket to Latin America before, to Colombia, and I had no issues. Now that was just one experience and I'm just one person, but we have had other people who've gone to Costa Rica, for example, and have been asked for onward proof of travel. So always a good idea to maybe have like a flight or a bus ticket or something just so you don't get questioned. And if any of you have questions about that, feel free to type them in the chat box and we can chat a little bit more about that later. Okay, all right. So visas. So real quickly, you're going to be hearing me say these different types of visas, depending on the country is really going to depend on what kind of visa you can get. Okay, so we're going to go through them real quickly. So a tourist visa, this is typically a visa that either you can get on your own, or you have to get it from an embassy ahead of time, but you don't necessarily need sponsorship for it, generally speaking, okay? So tourist visa is a visa that allows you to enter and travel in a country for a limited amount of time, and depending on the country and your citizenship, it's typically about 90 days. If you're there as a tourist, you're generally, I mean, you're not legally allowed to work. However, there are some countries that just really do not value getting or helping teachers get a work visa. So they are okay with you working on a tourist visa. And so there are ways to kind of get around this depending on what country you're in. So again, depending on the country too, it might require payment at the border, or it might require you getting an application and getting this tourist visa in advance from a consulate. Okay, so we'll talk about it a little bit more as we go through each specific country, but just to kind of give you a general background of that. A work visa. So a work visa is a visa that is legally sponsored by a business to work. You cannot just go to an embassy or a consulate and say, I want to apply for a work visa. So typically you have to be sponsored. You have to have proof of employment before you can actually do this. And depending on the country, you can get a work visa in advance from your home country, or you can actually get it on the ground, or you might actually have to leave the country to another country nearby, pick it up and come back. So each country is very different. Each country has different procedures, and some countries in Latin America value a work visa, as I mentioned, and others do not. Okay, so there's also something called a student visa. So this is where you would actually enroll into accredited classes or university. So typically when people do this, they're taking language courses. So they'd be taking Spanish classes or maybe Portuguese classes, depending on what country you're in. And usually on a student visa, you're studying part-time, and then it allows you to legally work part-time. So if this is something you're interested in doing, I mean, time, money, paperwork, and interviews at embassies and consulates are needed. Usually it takes, you have to get accepted by an institution and follow all of the procedures, and usually takes about 2 to 3 months to actually process your visa at the embassy. So a lot of people, when going to Latin America, I mean, really you're going and you're working, and you can take classes on the side without getting a student visa, or do language meetups or exchanges or something like that. So, but it is an option. Okay. And then so border crossing. So this is something that typically goes along with the tourist visa. This is when you have to leave your country that you're in to another country for several days in order to renew your tourist visa for another 90 days, for example. So if you have to do a border crossing, there's a few countries where this is a possibility for you to extend your stay, and just get a new stamp with the tourist visa. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, but if you hear me say border crossing, that is what it means. Okay, so we are gonna just jump right in and start going country by country right now. So I know quite a few of you mentioned that you want to teach in Argentina, which is really great. So if you are looking to head there, so you want to think about when the hiring seasons are, okay? Most countries in Latin America do have very specific hiring seasons that you really want to try to follow this timing for when you're going to be there and trying to find a job. Okay, so for Argentina, it's usually sometime maybe around the end of February, March, maybe the beginning of April. So keep in mind, in that part of the world, their summer is January and February. So that's usually when people are on vacation and school's not really in session. So this is the main hiring season. The secondary hiring season is again in July, August, okay? So there's no specific date when you have to be there. If you're not there by July 15th, you won't get a job. That's not the case. Every school kind of has different openings and different start dates. So it's just a general timing. So, just try to hit it maybe somewhere in the middle if you're kind of questioning about when you should actually go. Argentina really does have a face-to-face interview procedure. Now, anytime you guys hear me say face-to-face, so that is going to mean that most of the time you're going to have to actually go to the country and go to the schools in person and do your interviews in person. So you usually just show up at the schools, dress professionally, resume and cover letter, TEFL certificate in hand, and try to get an interview on the spot. Okay, so I know that sounds a little daunting for some of you, and some of you are like, oh, that sounds great, I love it. But it can be a little bit daunting, but I promise that this is the procedure, and if you follow it, you will be able to get a job, as long as you listen to everything that we're saying. However, also when I say face-to-face interviews, I always recommend to all my students that you still send out resumes and cover letters ahead of time, okay? Still try to do any networking or touching base with schools as much as you can to try to get your foot in the door. You know, sending out your resume and cover letter, I mean, who knows, maybe somebody will respond to you. Or if anything, it's just going to really help you familiarize yourself with the schools before you go, and you can kind of map out and plan out which schools you're going to go to. So just always a really good idea to do that ahead of time. Try to network with other alumni. You know, most of you are probably in an online course, so there's about 20 of you in there, but we have about 20,000 alumni, okay? So there's a lot of people to chat with and talk to, so definitely do that as well ahead of time. So if you're looking to go to Argentina, to your salary and the cost of living is probably going to be somewhere between $600 and $1,100 US per month. Okay, so that is kind of a big gap, and it really does depend. Like Buenos Aires is way more expensive to live in than say somewhere else in Argentina. So typically, if you're going to be living in the bigger cities, it's probably going to be a bit on the higher end, and it's also going to depend on your lifestyle as well. But this is about what you can expect, okay? So the visa too in Argentina is a tourist visa. So schools there really don't value helping teachers get work visas because you can enter as a tourist for 90 days, and then you can actually just leave the country and go to, most teachers actually just take the ferry to Uruguay to Montevideo for, you know, a long weekend, or they head to Chile and then come back. So once you're coming back into the country doing that border crossing, you're going to new stamp for another 90 days. So this is typically, this works in Argentina. This is what the majority of teachers do there. So that is something that you will have to kind of be comfortable with if you do want to work there, that you can expect that you will be there on a tourist visa, okay? And so, yeah, so let me know if you guys do have any other questions about that. So that's kind of how it works. And then also in Argentina, so I did mention we have an Argentina School Finder and how to find a job in Argentina, and many other resources in this section in our job search guidance manual. So if you go to the Argentina School Finder, this is just a huge list of schools we've already put together for you. So absolutely use this when you're looking to apply or go to these schools face-to-face. Also, I have heard, I will tell you guys for Argentina, I've had students and actually a couple of personal friends who've taught in Argentina that found really good gigs on Craigslist. So with Craigslist, always just be careful no matter what, but they do tend to use it there, so maybe check that out. And another good website is called BA Expats if you're looking to go to Buenos Aires. Okay. All right, so that is Argentina, and you can, you know, visit Patagonia and drink mate if you see that in the top. It's really, really beautiful, really amazing, so great, great choice. Okay, so moving on to Bolivia. So Bolivia has 2 hiring seasons, February, March, and then July to August, so somewhat similar to Argentina. That interview procedure really in Bolivia is going to be face-to-face. Your salary will be somewhere between $500 and $900 US per month. 900 is absolutely like way on the higher end. So, you know, I wouldn't expect maybe to be making quite so much, but somewhere within that vicinity of 500 to 900. Okay. So also with Bolivia, there actually is a visa called the Special Purpose Visa. And there are many documents that you'll need to get this visa. So you'll want to make sure that you bring them with you and try to take care of this before you come. So getting your yellow fever shot, you actually do need this before you enter the country. And then a letter of intent form from your employer. But this is, you know, something that if you are interviewing face-to-face, you won't actually get until you are there. However, definitely try to interview and connect with schools ahead of time. And then you may also need a proof of funds as well. So this is basically just usually some kind of a bank statement, proving that you have a certain amount of money to survive on, basically, that you're not going to be using like the country's resources and things as a foreigner. So typically those are kind of some of the major things that you might need for this visa. And we also do have a Bolivia school finder and how to find a job in Bolivia. And I didn't mention this with Argentina, but this kind of goes for the majority of countries when looking for English teaching work, is that the majority of jobs are going to be in those bigger cities. It's just, the most people, so you've got the most opportunities and, just more schools and more job openings. So, in Bolivia, absolutely, La Paz, Sucre, places like that are going to be, have way more options than some that are smaller. So with that being said, if you guys are looking to go to, I know it's very tempting to want to go live on the coast or maybe in the mountains in Latin America, which is absolutely possible. But just make sure that either you secure a job in one of the bigger cities first, and then maybe do some networking and head off to your second destination, or try your second destination first. And if it's not working and there's just not a lot of opportunity, then you can head to the big city. Okay. All right, so moving on to Brazil. So the peak hiring seasons is really March, but always after Carnival. Don't try to find work during Carnival. No one's really working. Everyone's partying and enjoying life. So if you're looking to go to Brazil, go after Carnival or go in July, August. The interview procedure overall is really face-to-face. I can't think of a student that I've worked with that has actually gotten a job ahead of time in Brazil, so just expect to actually have to go there to find your job. Your salary, this is going to be between $800 and $1,300 US a month. If you're living in Rio or Sao Paulo, it's probably going to be more on the higher end. Brazil is a little bit expensive in terms of Latin America, so just kind of keep that in mind. Also with Brazil is they have a little bit of an interesting visa situation. So it is going to be a tourist visa, so they really don't value the work visa. And it's also, if you're a US citizen, you do have to obtain this in advance. So make sure that before you're going to Brazil, give yourself enough time and look on your consulate's website that's in your jurisdiction, and just make sure you know exactly how to get the tourist visa. Each consulate's a little bit different, so you'll just want to make sure to go to their actual website and follow the instructions. And so typically too, you have to enter the country within a certain amount of time after you've obtained the visa. Usually it can be somewhere between 30 and 90 days, just really depending, so just make sure you plan that out as well. And then this initial visa is actually good for 90 days, so that gives you 3 months. And then can be extended by another 90 days while in the country by going to the Policia Federal. So it actually can be extended. So on a whole, you can be in Brazil for 6 months. Okay, so 180 days. Unfortunately, border hopping is really not permitted in Brazil, since it's only legal for you to be there 180 days out of the calendar year. So if you are really interested in Brazil, I would expect to just either go there for 6 months. Some people in the past have just overstayed their tourist visas, but the fines have been getting very large. They're really trying to stop people from doing that. And different schools can get in trouble too if you do that now. So, I'd probably just think about maybe going for 6 months and kind of, figuring it out once you're there. But, like I said, some people were extending their overstaying their visa, and you do get fined each day that you're overstaying it. So something to definitely keep in mind. And we do have a Brazil school finder and how to find a job in Brazil documents for you to check out. Okay, moving on to Chile. So Chile's peak hiring seasons are very similar to Argentina's, just, with the proximity, their summer months are January and February. So they're really going to be doing most of the hiring in March, possibly in the beginning of April, and then again in July and August. So Chile is actually a little bit different than a few of the countries I was mentioning before, because it is really possible to actually get a job before arriving there. Now, when I do say this a lot with Latin America, it is good to kind of expect or keep your expectations that you might have to get a job on the ground. However, we do work with quite a few schools in Chile that do hire in advance, so it is very possible. So absolutely just kind of keep that in mind. So the salary in Chile, just depending on where you are in the country, will be $750 to about $1,000 a month. Chile also does provide a work visa, so they are a country that really values it. And I will tell you guys that right now they're in the process of changing their work visa and the requirements for the work visa and how you're going to be getting the work visa. So we're still kind of trying to figure that out. It doesn't seem like it's actually fully gone through yet through the government, but there will be a visa, and your employer still will help you obtain it. But it's kind of looking like it's going to be something you'll have to process now in your home country before you leave, whereas it used to actually be easier to process it in Chile. So I will tell you guys, I think if you are looking to go to Chile, I would highly recommend trying to get a job ahead of time and figuring out the visa situation before you go right now. It's really kind of starting to look that way. We'll give you guys updates as it happens, but just want to let you know that's kind of in flux, but I think the best thing to do is really try to get a job ahead of time there for now. So we do have a Chile school finder. However, I've also listed a few of our preferred schools in Chile that we work closely with. So Beyond English is one, Ingentel is another, and Smooth Talkers is the third. However, there absolutely are many other schools if you look at our Chile school finder, and I know of other ones that have hired our teachers in advance as well. So, but those three are really good options, and they're schools that we actually work closely with and we've vetted out. So good places to apply if you're looking to head to Chile. Okay, moving on to Colombia. So Colombia's peak hiring season is January through March, and then again July and August. So really there's two. So it is possible too for Colombia to be hired before you actually go. However, people are also hired on the ground as well. So kind of like Chile. So definitely try to do your research and applications and sending your resume and cover letter ahead of time, but it is possible you might actually have to go there. So the salary, depending on where you are in Colombia, could be between $500 and $1,050 US per month. Some people do still work on a tourist visa. However, I think the work visa is probably a better option. And many schools who are legitimate and well-established will actually help you get the work visa. So actually this is, they actually changed to an M5 work visa. So that's actually the new name, but it's pretty much the same process. They just changed the name. So you need a visa application, passport copies, paperwork from your employer, and then it's approximately $245 US, which most teachers actually do have to pay for. So also with Colombia, there is a government-run program where they place you in public schools throughout the country. And we used to actually work very closely with one of our partners to help place people into this program. However, after this year, there's been some changes with the government, and they've decided to put another organization in place as of January, unfortunately, who've had no experience doing this in the past, and we've heard some really bad reviews about it. However, it is still running. It is still an option. We're just not necessarily recommending it right now. So we'll kind of have to see what happens, as hopefully maybe if things don't go as well, then the government will reassign it to the old organization, but we'll just kind of have to see. But just want to let you guys know it is an option. We just haven't had good reviews or feedback about it, but I know I've been asked about it quite a bit. So right now we are just really recommending that you try to find work if you're looking to go to Colombia in private language schools. So Bogota, Medellin, Cartagena, Cali, all those great places. So you can definitely find some options in our Colombia School Finder. Okay, moving on to Costa Rica. So peak hiring season actually in Costa Rica is throughout the year. It's really possible to find jobs in Costa Rica year round. So Typically, you'll see a little bit of a peak like after the Christmas holidays, so in January and then again in June. But it's really, you can find work there throughout the year. It's also possible to be hired before arrival in Costa Rica as well, but it's also possible to actually find work there on the ground too. So definitely try to do your applications ahead of time if possible. So the salary and cost of living is about 700 to 900 US dollars a month in Costa Rica. The visa situation is a little bit interesting here. So it's actually, so you will be working on a tourist visa, but you will get an ID number. So it's basically like you're on the books, even though you are working on a tourist visa. So you'll enter Costa Rica on your tourist visa, and it's good for 90 days. And so once you do this, you actually have to register with something called the Tributación in Costa Rica. They give you an ID number, and you fill out receipts to log your hours, and then your school actually submits them for you. So you're basically like on the books there, and it's a way for you to work legally, but you're still on a tourist visa. So it's a little bit different of a situation. And you do still have to actually renew your tourist visa every 90 days by crossing a border to a neighboring country. So that's something you still have to do. Employers know you have to do it. They're okay with it. And then actually, so a couple of the language schools that we are preferred partners, Intercultura and New Learning Academy. If you are a full-time teacher there and you do commit to a full year, I know that they also do help with a work visa. But if you're more of a part-time or freelance teacher, you can just work on your tourist visa. But if you are interested in Costa Rica, these two schools are really awesome places for you to start and send your application to. Okay, the Dominican Republic. So this is actually a location where the English language instruction is pretty good here. So within the past few years, though, we've worked with a few schools, and we've found out that it's actually, is a place that you can go teach. So the hiring season is technically year-round, though it's really a bit, you'll see a bit of a peak where schools are looking for more teachers in January to March, and then again in May through August. The hiring procedure, the two schools that we do work closely with do actually hire teachers before arrival, but it's also possible to actually be hired on the ground as well. The cost of living is 500 to 800 US dollars a month, and this is also what you can expect about for your salary. The visa, so some schools do hire you on a tourist visa. However, the two that we actually do work with, Baby's First Language School and Academia de Lenguas, they're both in Santo Domingo, but they actually do help with a business or residence visa, so you can work there legally. And then you can also teach legally in the Dominican Republic on a student visa as well, as we mentioned before. So we do have a Dominican Republic school finder, so there are some other schools listed in there, but if you're really looking there, I would start with Baby's First and Academia de Lenguas. Alrighty, Ecuador, my absolute favorite country. So with Ecuador, there are two peak hiring seasons, so February, March, and again in July to August, which is similar to many of the other countries in Latin America. Ecuador is also another location where it is possible to be hired before you get there. So some schools actually do hiring in advance, and then also on the ground as well. Usually it's about 500 to 800 US dollars, and they also use the dollar there, which is kind of nice as well. And then you can also get a visa. Your school should assist you with this. So you'll either get a volunteer professional visa, just depending on where you're going to be working and teaching. There are many documents needed to obtain this visa, and so you'll just want to make sure too that you read through our job search guidance resources to see and look through the consulate's website to see exactly what those documents are going to be. We don't necessarily recommend teaching on a tourist visa in Ecuador. Some people have before, some people have done it and made it happen, but it's really not the best idea, and you can actually get a visa to work with your school. So something good to keep in mind there. All right, so Guatemala. Guatemala does have a market, And actually, we've had very, very few people teach there because the demand isn't quite as high as some of the other countries in Central America, but it does exist. And they do have 2 hiring seasons, that February to March and July to August. You really can expect face-to-face interviews and hiring on the ground. The salary and cost of living there is quite low, 500 to 600 US dollars a month. The visa would be, you'd be working there on a tourist visa under the table, and it's something you get upon entry, which is good for 90 days. And then you would cross the border every 90 days by visiting a neighboring country to renew your 90-day tourist visa. And Honduras. Honduras is very similar to Guatemala. We've had very, very few people work there. There is a market, there's a small market, mostly in the big major cities. So the peak hiring season there is a little bit different. It's of more April to August. It is possible too to be hired before arrival. There are a couple schools that we've heard of that have done this before. However, I would expect if you are looking to go to Honduras that you'll probably be hired actually on the ground. Your salary and cost of living will be about $500 to $800 a month. The visa would be a tourist visa. You'd be there working under the table. Very similar to Guatemala. You get it once you arrive in Honduras for 90 days, and then you would be border hopping and visiting a neighboring country. Okay, and so we do have a Honduras school finder and some other resources for you to check out as well. All right, Mexico. So I think a couple people mentioned that they were interested in Mexico. So I do want to mention that I think Mexico is a great option, and it is really a country that's pretty overlooked, generally speaking, for English teachers. And there's actually just a huge demand with the proximity to the US, just a ton of people looking to learn English, and there's a lot of big cities there too. So a lot of demand. So because of this, there is a year-round peak hiring season, peak hiring season year-round. So but May and June and July are actually the peak months for you to start actually in August or September. But it's really possible to find work there year-round. Also with Mexico, it is possible to be hired before you get there as well. There are some schools that definitely do this. And then it's also possible to find work on the ground there too. So you can absolutely go to Mexico and, you know, get a job there too, if you'd prefer to do that and check it out first. You're typically looking, depending on the city and area that you're in, around 500 US, 800 USD per month. With Mexico too, you'll absolutely get a work visa. I would say a couple of years ago, we figured out that about 30% of teachers were still working on a tourist visa in Mexico. It's common if you're not really looking to stay for an entire year or longer, just because you can be in Mexico for about 180 days. So some people who are looking to just go for 3 or maybe 6 months. However, if you're looking to stay longer, you can definitely get a work visa called a residencia temporal. So this is something that you can process in your home country or in Mexico, but if you do process it in Mexico, you'll actually have to leave Mexico and pick it up outside of the country. So some people will go to Texas or to Guatemala to the embassy there to get it. It takes about 2 to 4 weeks, and it costs about $400 US to do so. And yeah, as I mentioned, it is still a little bit of a possibility to work on a tourist visa, but you know, you don't necessarily have to there. And so we do have a Mexico school finder and how to find a job in Mexico for those of you who want to go teach there. Okay, sadly, I'm sure most of you have kind of heard what's going on in Nicaragua right now. Not really a good, safe political climate at the time. So there's really been a lot of violence and demonstrations lately. So it's not the safest place to go at this time. You know, however, we do have some students who are still there. However, you know, that's kind of up to you and your call if you would feel comfortable going here. It is a really wonderful country. And there is an all-year hiring season, minus the Christmas and Easter holidays. So it is possible to find work, you know, in Managua or Leon, you know, all throughout the year. The hiring procedure there is really face-to-face. Not a lot of hiring in advance there, to be honest with you all. Salary and cost of living is super low, 300 to 600 US dollars per month. So very, very affordable place to live. You know, if you do go there too, the visa would be a tourist visa and you would be, you know, working under the table technically. And so it's very similar to Guatemala or Honduras, where you would receive your tourist visa upon entry, just a stamp in your passport. It's good for 90 days. And then it would be renewed by visiting a neighboring country. But you know, again, just with the situation there right now, you know, it's completely up to you if you do want to go, but doing the border crossings, I've heard is a little bit dangerous too right now. So just definitely something to think about, but who knows, the situation could potentially change in the next 6 months or a year, so hopefully. But there absolutely is a good English teaching market there. Okay, so Panama. Panama does have 2 hiring seasons, February, March, and July to August. The hiring procedure is really going to be face-to-face there. And then the salary too is 900 to 1,300 US dollars. And this is mostly speaking about Panama City, where most of the jobs are. Also, you would be working on your tourist visa there. So, you know, like Nicaragua, Honduras, and Guatemala. So you'd receive it upon entry, stamped in your passport, good for 90 days, and then you would renew it by heading to Costa Rica or maybe Colombia. Okay, and Peru. So Peru, again, very similar hiring season to the most of Latin America. February, March, and July to August. Hiring procedure is face-to-face, and you will find definitely in Peru, most of the jobs are going to be in Lima. Also, Arequipa is a really great spot to find work as well. Had a lot of alumni work there. Somewhere like Cusco, you know, places that are really touristy like that could be a possibility, and there's definitely language schools there. But just, you know, especially with somewhere like Cusco, it is, you know, there's a lot of tourists and expats constantly going through there, so might be a little bit saturated. So just something to keep in mind if, you know, if you're interested in a spot like that. The salary in Peru is going to be somewhere between 500 and 1,000 US dollars per month. And you'll also be there on a tourist visa, so stamped in your passport once you enter the country. So Peru is a little bit different. So typically you receive it upon entry, and it can be valid up to 183 days. So it's not 90 days. It can be, though. It kind of depends on the customs official, honestly, who's sitting there stamping your passport at the time. But you can get a stay from, you know, 183 days. And it's really not possible as much anymore. It used to be to border hop there, but it's really changed over the past couple of years. And it is, if you do overstay your tourist visa, it is going to be 4.05 Peruvian soles per day fine. So just depending on how long you overstay, you'll probably just be fined as you're leaving the country. Okay, so there's a Peru school finder and how to find a job in Peru document. Okay, and then last but not least, and sadly, I was sad to see Uruguay go out of the World Cup. I don't know if you guys also watched the World Cup. But yeah, I was sad to see them go. The peak hiring season there is February to March, and then also July to August. So it's very similar to the rest of Latin America. That hiring procedure is going to be face-to-face there with some hiring in advance. Definitely heard of it a few times, but majority speaking face-to-face. The salary and the cost of living is going to be much higher in Uruguay than a lot of the rest of Latin America. You'll see, you know, 1,100 to 1,500 US dollars a month. So absolutely. And that also comes with, you know, if the salary and cost of living is higher, you guys can also expect that the startup costs are going to be a little bit higher as well. So make sure that you kind of adjust and, you know, research that before you go. With Uruguay too, it's possible to get a cedula or temporary residence permit, so you won't have to be working on a tourist visa if you're there. And it actually can be applied for once you're in Uruguay. And there absolutely are some, you know, documents and things that you'll need to actually process it, but you will need an employment contract before you can do this. So you'll make sure you want to have a job before you try to actually apply for this. So, and we do have a Uruguay school finder and many other resources again in our job search guidance manual. Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, there's a few countries that we didn't mention, El Salvador, Paraguay, Venezuela, and some other Caribbean islands, for example. You know, Cuba I've been asked about Cuba a few times as well. So they are great countries, you know, good places to go visit potentially, but, you know, depending on the political climate there. But you know, they just don't have as strong of an ESL or teaching market. And it's not to say too that you can't find teaching jobs in these countries, because it actually is possible. It's just not, it's the demand just isn't as there, and they don't have the structure set up for ESL teaching. Although it's not impossible. So if you are interested in these places, we do have some resources. I think we do have school finders for many of these countries. And a few resources if you are interested in looking into it. And you could probably expect, if you are looking into them, they'll probably be found on the ground and likely to be there on a tourist visa. All right, everybody. So that does conclude our webinar for today. So just thank you all again so much for being here. And I hope that you all feel a little bit more informed about the country that you want to teach in Latin America. But I know there's a lot more to cover and a lot of other questions. So if you have not already, you are more than welcome to contact Student Affairs to set up a job search guidance appointment. We do have an appointment form where you can email us and we can send it to you. And you can be paired with a student affairs advisor, and we go through all the questions with you, make sure you understand all that good information that you're going to need. Yeah, help with your resume cover letter, help with contract reviews. So we're really here to help you and to be here as a guiding, you know, guiding hand for you guys throughout your job search. So yeah, again, as I mentioned too, I will be here on the chat for about 10 to 15 minutes. So I see a few people have sent me questions already, so I will get to them now. So feel free to send me a private note if you do have further questions. So have a great rest of your day, everybody, and thanks again.